There's a myth I hear almost every week in my clinic, especially from men over 50. It goes something like this. Declining energy, weaker erections, and slower mornings are just part of aging. There's nothing you can really do about it. Here's what the research shows. That belief is not only incomplete, it's often wrong. One large NIH-backed review found that many of the changes men attribute to getting older are actually driven by modifiable factors: blood flow, insulin sensitivity, inflammation, gut health, and hormone signaling. In other words, aging sets the stage, but lifestyle often writes the script. And one of the most underestimated levers, something I see a lot in my practice, is what you eat first thing in the morning. Let's break this down like I would with a patient. Your body doesn't wake up neutral. When you open your eyes, your nervous system, hormones, and blood vessels are already responding to signals from the night before. Cortisol rises, testosterone is supposed to peak, nitric oxide, the molecule that drives blood flow for erections and energy, should be available. The prostate and bladder are transitioning from rest to activity. What you eat in the first 60 minutes can either support that delicate transition or quietly sabotage it. Unfortunately, social media has filled this space with noise, extreme fasting rules, sugar-loaded breakfasts, protein myths, or supplements promising miracles. That leaves many men confused, embarrassed, or afraid they're doing something wrong. You deserve clarity, not fear. Think of your metabolism like a control panel. The morning meal touches multiple switches at once: glucose control, endothelial function, gut bacteria, inflammation, and even estrogen-testosterone balance. When those switches are set correctly, men often report steadier energy, improved erectile firmness, better urinary control, and fewer afternoon crashes. Not overnight miracles, but meaningful, measurable change. This is common, and it's treatable. Today, I want to walk you through one specific morning choice, simple, evidence-backed, and often overlooked, that supports performance, prostate health, and sustained energy in men over 50. No hype, no shame, just physiology, explained calmly and clearly. Stay with me. By the end of this conversation, you'll understand why this works, who it helps most, and how to use it safely and consistently, starting tomorrow morning. When men tell me their biggest concern is performance, erections that don't feel as firm, stamina that fades faster, or energy that never quite arrives, the first place I look is blood flow. Not testosterone first, not supplements, blood flow. Think of your vascular system like a network of flexible garden hoses. In your 30s, those hoses are usually wide and elastic. After 50, inflammation, insulin spikes, and oxidative stress slowly stiffen them. The result isn't just heart risk, it's reduced blood delivery to the penis, pelvic floor, prostate, and brain. This is something I see a lot in my practice. Here's what the research shows. Erections are fundamentally a vascular event. They depend on nitric oxide, a signaling molecule produced by the lining of your blood vessels, the endothelium. Nitric oxide tells the smooth muscle in penile tissue to relax so blood can rush in and stay there. When nitric oxide availability drops, firmness drops with it. Now here's where the morning matters. Several studies indexed in PubMed and supported by NIH-funded vascular research show that dietary nitrates, found naturally in certain whole foods, are converted in the body into nitric oxide. This pathway becomes more important with age because the enzyme-based nitric oxide system weakens over time. Think of it like this. Your body has a backup generator for blood flow. After 50, you need to use it. One of the most effective and safest ways to activate that system in the morning is through nitrate-rich, fiber-dense whole foods, particularly when they're eaten without refined sugar. This is why populations studied by Harvard and European urology groups consistently show better vascular and erectile outcomes in men who consume nitrate-containing plants early in the day. When this food is eaten in the morning, 3 things happen. First, nitric oxide availability increases, improving pelvic and penile blood flow for hours, not minutes. This isn't a stimulant effect, it's a vascular one. Second, arterial stiffness decreases slightly but meaningfully. Even small improvements here translate to better erection quality and endurance. Third, blood pressure regulation improves, which matters because high or fluctuating blood pressure is one of the strongest predictors of erectile dysfunction in men over 50. Now, a gentle myth to clear up. Many men think they need extreme protein or sugar-free fasting in the morning for hormones. But studies from Mayo Clinic and metabolic research centers show that skipping supportive carbohydrates and fiber early in the day often increases cortisol, which reduces nitric oxide signaling. That's the opposite of what we want for performance. This is why the specific morning food we're discussing, simple, unprocessed, and plant-based at its core, works so consistently. It doesn't force your body. It supports a pathway your physiology already understands. If you've ever noticed that your best energy and confidence days start with a calm, steady morning, not a rush or crash, this is part of the reason. In the next section, we'll talk about hormones, specifically how this same morning choice helps stabilize insulin and cortisol, protecting testosterone where it actually matters. One of the quietest threats to male performance after 50 isn't low testosterone itself. It's hormonal noise. By that, I mean unstable insulin and chronically elevated cortisol. This is something I see a lot in my practice, even in men whose testosterone labs look normal. Let's break this down like I would with a patient. Testosterone doesn't act in isolation. It works inside a hormonal environment. When insulin is spiking and crashing, or cortisol stays elevated through the morning, testosterone signaling becomes less effective. Libido drops. Erections feel less responsive. Fat accumulates around the abdomen, which then increases aromatase activity, the enzyme that converts testosterone into estrogen. Think of testosterone like a radio signal. Insulin resistance and cortisol static make it harder to hear. Here's what the research shows. Studies from Harvard and NIH-supported metabolic research consistently demonstrate that high glycemic breakfasts, pastries, sweet cereals, fruit juice, even healthy smoothies, cause sharp insulin spikes. In men over 50, those spikes are followed by reactive drops that stimulate cortisol release. Cortisol, in turn, directly suppresses nitric oxide production and interferes with testosterone receptors. On the other extreme, skipping breakfast entirely can also raise cortisol, especially in men who already have sleep disruption, prostate-related nocturia, or work stress. This is why so many men tell me they feel wired but tired by mid-morning. Now here's where the specific morning food comes back into the picture. When men consume a fiber-rich, low-glycemic, nitrate-containing plant food in the morning, especially when paired with healthy fats or protein, insulin rises gently, cortisol stays controlled, and testosterone signaling is preserved. Mayo Clinic research on metabolic flexibility shows that this type of breakfast improves insulin sensitivity throughout the entire day, not just after the meal. Think of it like easing your foot onto the gas instead of slamming it. This matters for performance because erections are exquisitely sensitive to stress hormones. Even small cortisol elevations can reduce pelvic blood flow and delay arousal. When men correct this morning pattern, they often report not just better erections, but calmer focus and fewer energy crashes. Here's a practical takeaway I often give patients. If your breakfast leaves you hungry, shaky, or irritable within 2 hours, it's not supporting your hormones, no matter how healthy it sounds. A soft reminder here, you don't need perfection, you need consistency. This isn't about forcing testosterone higher, it's about getting obstacles out of its way. In the next section, we'll move deeper into an area that surprises many men, the connection between gut bacteria, inflammation, and prostate symptoms, and how this same morning choice supports all three. When men come to me with urinary urgency, weak stream, pelvic tension, or a feeling that their prostate is always irritated, They're often surprised when we talk about the gut, but the science here is very clear and very under-discussed. Think of your gut microbiome like a regulatory hub. It doesn't just digest food, it trains your immune system, influences estrogen metabolism, and controls inflammatory signals that reach the prostate and bladder. This is something I see a lot in my practice, especially in men over 50. Here's what the research shows. NIH and PubMed indexed studies have found that men with benign prostatic hyperplasia and chronic pelvic symptoms often have lower microbial diversity and higher levels of pro-inflammatory gut bacteria. That inflammation doesn't stay in the intestines, it circulates, sensitizing pelvic nerves and prostate tissue. Now, here's where the morning meal becomes powerful. Certain whole plant foods, especially those rich in fermentable fibers and polyphenols, feed beneficial gut bacteria that produce short-chain fatty acids like butyrate. These compounds act like anti-inflammatory messengers. Harvard-led research has shown that higher butyrate levels are associated with reduced systemic inflammation and improved endothelial function. Think of it like watering the right plants in a garden. Over time, the weeds lose ground. When this food is eaten in the morning, it helps set the microbial tone for the entire day. Men often notice fewer digestive symptoms first, less bloating, more regularity, followed weeks later by quieter urinary symptoms and reduced pelvic tension. Not because the prostate shrinks overnight, but because the inflammatory volume gets turned down. A common myth I want to gently clear up. Many men avoid fiber because they're afraid it will worsen bloating or urgency. In reality, low-fiber diets are far more likely to irritate the gut and bladder. The key is starting with the right type and amount, especially early in the day when gut motility is naturally higher. Here's a practical tip I often give patients. If your urinary symptoms worsen as the day goes on, your morning inflammation load is likely too high. This is where consistency matters. One good morning doesn't change the microbiome. Repeated signals do. And this is also where men start to feel a subtle but important shift. Less pressure, less irritation, more confidence leaving the house without constantly thinking about the nearest restroom. In the next section, we'll address a sensitive but crucial topic: testosterone, DHT, and prostate safety, and why this morning habit supports performance without pushing hormones in the wrong direction. One of the most common fears I hear from men over 50 is this: if I support testosterone, won't that worsen my prostate? It's a reasonable concern, and it's also an area where misinformation has caused a lot of unnecessary anxiety. Let's break this down like I would with a patient. Testosterone itself is not the enemy of the prostate. The issue is imbalance, particularly excessive conversion of testosterone into dihydrotestosterone, or DHT, in the context of inflammation and insulin resistance. This is something urology associations and NIH-funded studies have clarified repeatedly over the past decade. Think of testosterone as raw material. DHT is a more potent derivative. In a healthy system, that conversion is regulated. In a stressed, inflamed system, it becomes exaggerated. Here's what the research shows. Men with higher insulin resistance and visceral fat have increased activity of 5-alpha reductase, the enzyme that converts testosterone into DHT. Elevated DHT combined with chronic inflammation is associated with prostate enlargement and worsening urinary symptoms. Simply, boosting testosterone without addressing metabolism often backfires. Now here's where the morning choice we're discussing becomes important again. When men eat a fiber-rich, low-glycemic, polyphenol-containing plant food in the morning, insulin sensitivity improves and inflammatory signaling drops. Harvard and Mayo Clinic research shows that improved insulin control reduces excessive DHT conversion without lowering testosterone itself. In fact, free testosterone availability often improves because sex hormone-binding globulin normalizes. Think of it like restoring traffic flow instead of banning cars. This is why many men notice something counterintuitive: better erection quality and libido without worsening prostate symptoms. The system becomes more balanced, not more stimulated. This is something I emphasize gently but clearly in my practice. Supporting male performance does not require hormonal extremes. It requires metabolic calm. A soft CTA here, especially if you've been afraid of addressing performance at all. Talk to your clinician about your insulin markers, waist circumference, and morning eating pattern before chasing supplements or hormones. Often, these foundational shifts change the entire conversation. And if you're already being monitored for prostate health, this approach is generally compatible with medical care because it works with physiology, not against it. In the next section, we'll talk about energy and endurance, why so many men say, "I have desire, but I don't have stamina," and how correcting morning endothelial and mitochondrial function changes that experience. A phrase I hear often from men in their 50s and 60s is, "I still have desire, I just run out of energy." That distinction matters because it tells us the issue isn't motivation or masculinity, it's cellular endurance. Let's break this down like I would with a patient. Energy isn't just about calories or caffeine. It's about how efficiently your cells use oxygen and fuel. After 50, mitochondrial function, the ability of your cells to produce sustained energy, naturally declines. When this is combined with stiff blood vessels and low-grade inflammation, men experience what I call short-burst energy. You can start strong, but you fade quickly. Think of it like a flashlight with weak batteries. It turns on, but it doesn't stay bright. Here's what the research shows. Studies from NIH and Harvard-affiliated labs demonstrate that endothelial health and mitochondrial efficiency are tightly linked. When nitric oxide signaling improves, oxygen delivery improves. When insulin is stable, mitochondria work more efficiently. When inflammation drops, fatigue signals quiet down. This is why the morning food we've been discussing has effects far beyond erections. By improving nitric oxide availability, stabilizing blood sugar, and feeding anti-inflammatory gut bacteria, this breakfast pattern supports all-day energy without overstimulation. Men often report fewer afternoon crashes, better exercise tolerance, and more physical confidence, including in intimate situations. A gentle myth to address here: many men rely on coffee alone in the morning and skip food entirely. Caffeine can temporarily mask fatigue, but Mayo Clinic research shows it doesn't improve mitochondrial output when the underlying metabolic signals are off. In some men, it actually increases cortisol and worsens the crash later. Think of caffeine as a volume knob, not a power source. Here's a practical application I often suggest. If your energy drops sharply between 2 and 4 p.m., your morning metabolic foundation likely wasn't strong enough. This is where consistency becomes noticeable. After 2 to 3 weeks of a supportive morning pattern, men often feel steadier, not wired, more capable, not tense. That steadiness translates directly into sexual stamina, mood, and overall vitality. A soft CTA here. If you're training, walking, or doing pelvic floor exercises for performance, this kind of breakfast amplifies those benefits. It doesn't replace movement. It makes movement work better. In the next and final main section, we'll bring everything together: how to use this morning habit safely, who should modify it, and the most common mistakes I see, so you can apply this without confusion or fear. At this point, the physiology should feel clearer. Now let's make it usable, because good science only helps if it fits real life. Let's break this down like I would with a patient. The morning food pattern we've been discussing is not complicated. At its core, it centers on beets or beet-derived whole food paired appropriately. Beets are one of the most consistently studied dietary sources of natural nitrates, polyphenols, and fermentable fiber, all of which we've connected to blood flow, hormone signaling, prostate calm, and sustained energy. Here's what the research shows. PubMed indexed trials and cardiovascular studies cited by NIH and Harvard repeatedly demonstrate that whole beets, not isolated supplements, improve nitric oxide availability, endothelial function, and exercise tolerance, especially in older adults. The effects are strongest when consumed earlier in the day when nitric oxide pathways are most responsive. Think of it like opening the windows in the morning instead of at night. Practically, this can look like a small serving of roasted or lightly steamed beets, unsweetened beet slices added to a savory breakfast, or plain beet powder, no added sugar, mixed into water or yogurt. Portion matters. More is not better. In my practice, most men benefit from the equivalent of half to one small beet in the morning. That's enough to activate nitric oxide pathways without overwhelming digestion. Common mistakes I want to gently point out. First, pairing beets with sugar-heavy foods. This blunts the benefits by spiking insulin. Second, taking beet supplements late at night. That's not when your vascular system needs support. Third, expecting instant results. This is physiology, not a stimulant. Who should modify this approach? Men with kidney stones should discuss oxalate intake with their clinician. Men on blood pressure medications should monitor readings, as nitric oxide can enhance effects. Men with diabetes should pair beets with protein or fat to maintain glucose stability. This is something I emphasize clearly. This is food, not a drug. But food still has physiological power. A reassuring note. Urology and cardiovascular guidelines consistently show that nitrate-rich vegetables are safe for the vast majority of men and are associated with lower, not higher, long-term risk. If you take one thing from this section, let it be this. You don't need extremes. You need alignment with your biology. When we step back and look at the full picture, something important becomes clear. What many men experience after 50, changes in energy, erections, urinary comfort, or confidence, is not a personal failure. It's physiology responding to years of signals, and physiology can be guided. Here's what the research shows when you connect the dots instead of isolating symptoms. Blood flow, hormone signaling, gut health, inflammation, and cellular energy are not separate systems. They speak to each other constantly. When one is stressed, the others compensate until they can't anymore. That's when men start feeling like their body is working against them. But this is common, and it's treatable. What we've discussed today isn't a hack or a shortcut. It's a way of reducing friction inside your body. By choosing a simple, nitrate-rich, fiber-supported morning food, you're helping your blood vessels open instead of resist. You're calming cortisol instead of fighting it. You're protecting testosterone signaling rather than forcing it. You're feeding the gut bacteria that quiet inflammation instead of amplifying it. Think of it like tuning an instrument. You don't replace the violin, you adjust the tension so it plays the way it was meant to. In my clinical experience, men who make this kind of small, consistent shift often report something deeper than improved performance. They feel more trust in their body, less fear, less urgency to chase the next supplement or headline. They stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What does my body need?" And that's a powerful change. If you take nothing else from this conversation, remember this. You don't have to be afraid of your body. You just need good information. Aging doesn't mean decline by default. It means your physiology requires clearer signals. Stay curious about your health. Stay patient with your progress. And if something feels off, talk to a qualified clinician, not because you're broken, but because you deserve support. Thank you for spending this time with me. Stay informed, stay grounded, and I'll see you in the next one.